The non-bipedal knuckle walkers, the gorillas and chimpanzees, diverged from the hominine line over a period covering the same time, so either Sahelanthropus or Orin may be our last shared ancestor. Ardipithecus, a full biped, arose approximately 5.6 million years ago. 121. The early bipeds eventually evolved into the Australopithecines and still later into the genus Homo. There are several theories of the adaptation value of bipedalism. It is possible that bipedalism was favored because it freed the hands for reaching and carrying food, saved energy during locomotion, 122 enabled long-distance running and hunting, provided an enhanced field of vision, and helped avoid hyperthermia by reducing the surface area exposed to direct sun, features all advantageous for thriving in the new savanna and woodland environment created as a result of the East African Rift Valley uplift versus the previous closed forest habitat. 122, 123, 124 A 2007 study provides support for the hypothesis that bipedalism evolved because it used less energy than quadrupedal knuckle walking. 125, 126 However, recent studies suggest that bipedality without the ability to use fire would not have allowed global dispersal. 127 This change in gait saw lengthening of the legs proportionately when compared to the length of the arms, which were shortened through the removal of the need for brachiation. Another change is the shape of the big toe. Recent studies suggest that Australopithecines still live part of the time in trees as a result of maintaining a grasping big toe. This was progressively lost in habilines. Evolution of bipedalism has been accompanied by a large number of skeletal changes, not just to the legs and pelvis, but also to the vertebral column, feet and ankles, and skull. 128 The femur evolved into a slightly more angular position to move the center of gravity toward the geometric center of the body. The knee and ankle joints became increasingly robust to better support increased weight. To support the increased weight on each vertebra in the upright position, the human vertebral column became S-shaped and the lumbar vertebrae became shorter and wider. In the feet the big toe moved into alignment with the other toes to help in forward locomotion. The arms and forearms shortened relative to the legs making it easier to run. The foramen magnum migrated under the skull and more anterior. 129. The most significant changes occurred in the pelvic region, where the long downward-facing iliac blade was shortened and widened as a requirement for keeping the center of gravity stable while walking. 28 Bipedal hominids have a shorter but broader, bowl-like pelvis due to this. A drawback is that the birth canal of bipedal apes is smaller than in knuckle-walking apes, though there has been a widening of it in comparison to that of Australopithecine and modern humans, thus permitting the passage of newborns due to the increase in cranial size. This is limited to the upper portion, since further increase can hinder normal bipedal movement. 130. The shortening of the pelvis and smaller birth canal evolved as a requirement for bipedalism and had significant effects on the process of human birth, which is much more difficult in modern humans than in other primates. During human birth, because of the variation in size of the pelvic region, the fetal head must be in a transverse position compared to the mother during entry into the birth canal and rotate about 90 degrees upon exit. 131 The smaller birth canal became a limiting factor to brain size increases in early humans and prompted a shorter gestation period leading to the relative immaturity of human offspring, who are unable to walk much before 12 months and have greater neoteny, compared to other primates, who are mobile at a much earlier age. 124 The increased brain growth after birth and the increased dependency of children on mothers had a major effect upon the female reproductive cycle. 132 And the more frequent appearance of alloparenting in humans when compared with other hominids. 133 Delayed human sexual maturity also led to the evolution of menopause with one explanation, the grandmother hypothesis, providing that elderly women could better pass on their genes by taking care of their daughter's offspring, as compared to having more children of their own. 134, 135. Encephalization. Skulls of successive or near successive, depending on the source, human evolutionary ancestors, see up until modern, Homo sapiens. Maya, million years ago, Kya, 1,000 years ago. Brain size and tooth size in hominins. The human species eventually developed a much larger brain than that of other primates, typically 1,330 cc, 81 cu in modern humans, nearly 3 times the size of a chimpanzee or gorilla brain. 138 After a period of stasis with Australopithecus and Amensis and Ardipithecus, species which had smaller brains as a result of their bipedal locomotion. 139 The pattern of encephalization started with Homo habilis, whose 600 cc 37 cu in brain was slightly larger than that of chimpanzees. This evolution continued in Homo erectus with 800-1100 cm 3, 49 to 67 cu in, and reached a maximum in Neanderthals with 1200-1900 cm 3, 73 to 116 cu in, larger even than modern Homo sapiens. This brain increase manifested during postnatal brain growth, far exceeding that of other apes' heterochrony. It also allowed for extended periods of social learning and language acquisition in juvenile humans, beginning as much as 2 million years ago. Encephalization may be due to a dependency on calorie-dense, difficult to acquire food. 140. Furthermore, the changes in the structure of human brains may be even more significant than the increase in size. 141, 142, 143, 52 Fossilized skull shows the brain size in early humans fell within the range of modern humans 300,000 years ago, but only got its present-day brain shape between 100,000 and 35,000 years ago. 144. The size and shape of the skull changed over time. The leftmost, and largest, is a replica of a modern human skull. The temporal lobes, which contain centers for language processing, have increased disproportionately, as has the prefrontal cortex, which has been related to complex decision-making and moderating social behavior. 138 Encephalization has been tied to increased starches 51 and meat 145, 146 in the diet, however a 2022 meta-study called into question the role of meat. 147 Other factors of the development of cooking. 148 And it has been proposed that intelligence increased as a response to an increased necessity for solving social problems as human society became more complex. 149 Changes in skull morphology, such as smaller mandibles and mandible muscle attachments, allowed more room for the brain to grow. 150 The increase in volume of the neocortex also included a rapid increase in size of the cerebellum. Its function has traditionally been associated with balance and fine motor control, but more recently with speech and cognition. The great apes, including hominids, had a more pronounced cerebellum relative to the neocortex than other primates. It has been suggested that because of its function of sensory motor control and learning complex muscular actions, the cerebellum may have underpinned human technological adaptations, including the preconditions of speech. 151, 152, 153, 154. The immediate survival advantage of encephalization is difficult to discern, as the major brain changes from Homo erectus to Homo heidelbergensis were not accompanied by major changes in technology. It has been suggested that the changes were mainly social and behavioral, including increased empathic abilities, 155, 156 increases in size of social groups, 149, 157, 158 and increased behavioral plasticity. 159. Humans are unique in the ability to acquire information through social transmission and adapt that information. 160. The emerging field of cultural evolution studies human sociocultural change from an evolutionary perspective. 161. Evolution of the shape, size, and contours of the human Homo skull. 162, 163, 160, 63, 168, 169, 170, 171, 105, 172, 173. Sexual dimorphism. The reduced degree of sexual dimorphism in humans is visible primarily in the reduction of the male canine tooth relative to other ape species, except gibbons, and reduced brow ridges and general robustness of males. Another important physiological change related to sexuality in humans was the evolution of hidden estrus. Humans are the only hominoids in which the female is fertile year-round and in which no special signals of fertility are produced by the body, such as genital swelling or overt changes in proceptivity during estrus. 174. Nonetheless, humans retain a degree of sexual dimorphism in the distribution of body hair and subcutaneous fat, and in the overall size, males being around 15% larger than females. 175. These changes taken together have been interpreted as a result of an increased emphasis on pair bonding as a possible solution to the requirement for increased parental investment due to the prolonged infancy of offspring. 176. Ulnar opposition. Only the human is able to touch the little finger with the thumb. The ulnar opposition, the contact between the thumb and the tip of the little finger of the same hand, is unique to the genus Homo. 177, including Neanderthals, the Cimidolasuesos hominins and anatomically modern humans. 178, 179, in other primates, the thumb is short and unable to touch the little finger. 178, the ulnar opposition facilitates the precision grip and power grip of the human hand, underlying all the skilled manipulations. Other changes. A number of other changes have also characterized the evolution of humans, among them an increased reliance on vision rather than smell, highly reduced olfactory bulb, a longer juvenile developmental period and higher infant dependency. 180, a smaller gut and small, misaligned teeth, faster basal metabolism. 181, loss of body hair. 182, an increase in eccrine sweat gland density that is 10 times higher than any other Catarrhinian primates. 183, yet humans use 30% to 50% less water per day compared to chimps and gorillas. 184, more REM sleep but less sleep in total. 185, a change in the shape of the dental arcade from U-shaped to parabolic, development of a chin found in Homo sapiens alone, styloid processes, and a descended larynx. As the human hand and arms adapted to the making of tools and were used less for climbing, the shoulder blades changed too. As a side effect, it allowed human ancestors to throw objects with greater force, speed and accuracy. 186. Use of tools. A sharp rock, an Oldowan pebble tool, the most basic of human stone tools. The harnessing of fire was a pivotal milestone in human history. Acheulean hand axes from Kent. H. erectus flint work, the types shown are clockwise from top chordate, Ficron and ovate. Venus of Willendorf, an example of Paleolithic art, dated 24-26,000 years ago. The use of tools has been interpreted as a sign of intelligence, and it has been theorized that tool use may have stimulated certain aspects of human evolution, especially the continued expansion of the human brain. 187. Paleontology has yet to explain the expansion of this organ over millions of years despite being extremely demanding in terms of energy consumption. The brain of a modern human consumes, on average, about 13 watts, 260 kilocalories per day, a fifth of the body's resting power consumption. 188. Increased tool use would allow hunting for energy-rich meat products, and would enable processing more energy-rich plant products. Researchers have suggested that early hominins were thus under evolutionary pressure to increase their capacity to create and use tools. 189. Precisely when early humans started to use tools is difficult to determine, because the more primitive these tools are, for example, sharp-edged stones, the more difficult it is to decide whether they are natural objects or human artifacts. 187. There is some evidence that the Australopithecines may have used broken bones as tools, but this is debated. 190. Many species make and use tools, but it is the human genus that dominates the areas of making and using more complex tools. The oldest known tools are flakes from West Turkana, Kenya, which date to 3.3 million years ago. 191. The next oldest stone tools are from Gona, Ethiopia, and are considered the beginning of the Oldowan technology. These tools date to about 2.6 million years ago. 192. A Homo fossil was found near some Oldowan tools, and its age was noted at 2.3 million years old, suggesting that maybe the Homo species did indeed create and use these tools. It is a possibility but does not yet represent solid evidence. 193. The third metacarpal styloid process enables the hand bone to lock into the wrist bones, allowing for greater amounts of pressure to be applied to the wrist and hand from a grasping thumb and fingers. It allows humans the dexterity and strength to make and use complex tools. This unique anatomical feature separates humans from apes and other non-human primates, and is not seen in human fossils older than 1.8 million years. 194. Bernard Wood noted that Paranthropus coexisted with the early Homo species in the area of the Oldowan industrial complex, over roughly the same span of time. Although there is no direct evidence which identifies Paranthropus as the tool makers, their anatomy lends to indirect evidence of their capabilities in this area. Most paleoanthropologists agree that the early Homo species were indeed responsible for most of the Oldowan tools found. They argue that when most of the Oldowan tools were found in association with human fossils, Homo was always present, but Paranthropus was not. 193. In 1994, Randall Sussman used the anatomy of opposable thumbs as the basis for his argument that both the Homo and Paranthropus species were toolmakers. He compared bones and muscles of human and chimpanzee thumbs, finding that humans have 3 muscles which are lacking in chimpanzees. Humans also have thicker metacarpals with broader heads, allowing more precise grasping than the chimpanzee hand can perform. Sussman posited that modern anatomy of the human opposable thumb is an evolutionary response to the requirements associated with making and handling tools and that both species were indeed toolmakers. 193. Transition to behavioral modernity. Anthropologists describe modern human behavior to include cultural and behavioral traits such as specialization of tools, use of jewelry and images such as cave drawings, organization of living space, rituals such as grave gifts, specialized hunting techniques, exploration of less hospitable geographical areas, and barter trade networks, as well as more general traits such as language and complex symbolic thinking. Debate continues as to whether a revolution led to modern humans' Big Bang of human consciousness, or whether the evolution was more gradual. 47. Until about 40,000 years ago, the use of stone tools seems to have progressed stepwise. Each phase, H. habilis, H. ergaster, H. neanderthalensis, marked a new technology, followed by very slow development until the next phase. Currently paleoanthropologists are debating whether these Homo species possess some or many modern human behaviors. They seem to have been culturally conservative, maintaining the same technologies and foraging patterns over very long periods. Around 50,000 BP, human culture started to evolve more rapidly. The transition to behavioral modernity has been characterized by some as a Great Leap Forward, 195, or as the Upper Paleolithic Revolution, 196 due to the sudden appearance in the archaeological record of distinctive signs of modern behavior in big game hunting. 197 Evidence of behavioral modernity significantly earlier also exists from Africa, with older evidence of abstract imagery, widened subsistence strategies, more sophisticated tools and weapons, and other, modern, behaviors, and many scholars have recently argued that the transition to modernity occurred sooner than previously believed. 47 198, 199, 200. Other scholars consider the transition to have been more gradual, noting that some features had already appeared among archaic African Homo sapiens 300,000 to 200,000 years ago. 201, 202, 203, 204, 205 Recent evidence suggests that the Australian Aboriginal population separated from the African population 75,000 years ago, and that they made a 160 kilometers 99 miles sea journey 60,000 years ago, which may diminish the significance of the Upper Paleolithic Revolution. 206. Modern humans started burying their dead, making clothing from animal hides, hunting with more sophisticated techniques, such as using pit traps or driving animals off cliffs, and cave painting. 207 As human culture advanced, different populations innovated existing technologies. Artifacts such as fish hooks, buttons, and bone needles show signs of cultural variation, which had not been seen prior to 50,000 BP. Typically, the older H. neanderthalensis populations did not vary in their technologies, although the Chitalbronian assemblages have been found to be Neanderthal imitations of H. sapiens aurignacian technologies. 208. Recent and ongoing human evolution. Anatomically modern human populations continue to evolve, as they are affected by both natural selection and genetic drift. Although selection pressure on some traits, such as resistance to smallpox, has decreased in the modern age, humans are still undergoing natural selection for many other traits. Some of these are due to specific environmental pressures, while others are related to lifestyle changes since the development of agriculture 10,000 years ago, urbanization 5,000, and industrialization 250 years ago. It has been argued that human evolution has accelerated since the development of agriculture 10,000 years ago and civilization some 5,000 years ago, resulting, it is claimed, in substantial genetic differences between different current human populations. 209 And more recent research indicates that for some traits, the developments and innovations of human culture have driven a new form of selection that coexists with, and in some cases has largely replaced, natural selection. 210. Reconstruction of the Upper Paleolithic human oase to circa 40,000 years BP 211. Particularly conspicuous is variation in superficial characteristics, such as afro-textured hair, or the recent evolution of light skin and blonde hair in some populations, which are attributed to differences in climate. Particularly strong selective pressures have resulted in high-altitude adaptation in humans, with different ones in different isolated populations. Studies of the genetic basis show that some developed very recently, with Tibetans evolving over 3,000 years to have high proportions of an allele of EPAS1 that is adaptive to high altitudes. Other evolution is related to endemic diseases. The presence of malaria selects for sickle cell trait, the heterozygous form of sickle cell gene, while in the absence of malaria, the health effects of sickle cell anemia select against this trait. For another example, the population at risk of a severe debilitating disease CRU has significant overrepresentation of an immune variant of the prion protein gene G127V versus non-immune alleles. The frequency of this genetic variant is due to the survival of immune persons. 212, 213 Some reported trends remain unexplained in the subject of ongoing research in the novel field of evolutionary medicine. Polycystic ovary syndrome (PCOS) reduces fertility and thus is expected to be subject to extremely strong negative selection, but its relative commonality in human populations suggests the counteracting selection pressure. The identity of that pressure remains the subject of some debate. 214. Recent human evolution related to agriculture includes genetic resistance to infectious disease that has appeared in human populations by crossing the species barrier from domesticated animals. 215 As well as changes in metabolism due to changes in diet, such as lactase persistence. Cultural-driven evolution can defy the expectations of natural selection. While human populations experience some pressure that drives the selection for producing children at younger ages, the advent of effective contraception, higher education, and changing social norms have driven the observed selection in the opposite direction. 216 However, culturally driven selection need not necessarily work counter or in opposition to natural selection. Some proposals to explain the high rate of recent human brain expansion indicate a kind of feedback whereupon the brain's increased social learning efficiency encourages cultural developments that in turn encourage more efficiency, which drive more complex cultural developments that demand still greater efficiency, and so forth. 217 Culturally driven evolution has an advantage in that in addition to the genetic effects, it can be observed also in the archaeological record. The development of stone tools across the Paleolithic period connects to culturally driven cognitive development in the form of skill acquisition supported by the culture and the development of increasingly complex technologies and the cognitive ability to elaborate them. 218 In contemporary times, since industrialization, some trends have been observed. For instance, menopause is evolving to occur later. 219 Other reported trends appear to include lengthening of the human reproductive period and reduction in cholesterol levels, blood glucose and blood pressure in some populations. 219 History of study. Before Darwin. The Homo, the biological genus to which humans belong, is Latin for human. E. It was chosen originally by Carl Linnaeus in his classification system. F. The English word human is from the Latin humanus, the adjectival form of homo. The Latin homo derives from the Indo-European root *dhg hem, or earth. 220 Linnaeus and other scientists of his time also considered the great apes to be the closest relatives of humans based on morphological and anatomical similarities. 221 Darwin. The possibility of linking humans with earlier apes by descent became clear only after 1859 with the publication of Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species, in which he argued for the idea of the evolution of new species from earlier ones. Darwin's book did not address the question of human evolution, saying only that light will be thrown on the origin of man and his history. 222 The first debates about the nature of human evolution arose between Thomas Henry Huxley and Richard Owen. Huxley argued for human evolution from apes by illustrating many of the similarities and differences between humans and other apes, and did so particularly in his 1863 book Evidence as to Man's Place in Nature. Many of Darwin's early supporters, such as Alfred Russel Wallace and Charles Lyell, did not initially agree that the origin of the mental capacities and the moral sensibilities of humans could be explained by natural selection, though this later changed. Darwin applied the theory of evolution and sexual selection to humans in his 1871 book The Descent of Man, and Selection in Relation to Sex. 223 First fossils. A major problem in the 19th century was the lack of fossil intermediaries. Neanderthal remains were discovered in a limestone quarry in 1856, 3 years before the publication of On the Origin of Species, and Neanderthal fossils had been discovered in Gibraltar even earlier, but it was originally claimed that these were the remains of a modern human who had suffered some kind of illness. 224 Despite the 1891 discovery by Eugene Dubois of what is now called Homo erectus at Trinil, Java, it was only in the 1920s when such fossils were discovered in Africa, that intermediate species began to accumulate. 225 In 1925, Raymond Dart described Australopithecus africanus. 226 The type specimen was the tongue child, an Australopithecine infant which was discovered in a cave. The child's remains were a remarkably well-preserved tiny skull and an endocast of the brain. Although the brain was small, 410 cc, its shape was rounded, unlike that of chimpanzees and gorillas, and more like a modern human brain. Also, the specimen showed short canine teeth. In the position of the foramen magnum, the hole in the skull where the spine enters was evidence of bipedal locomotion. All of these traits convinced Dart that the tongue child was a bipedal human ancestor, a transitional form between apes and humans. The East African fossils. Fossil hominid evolution display at the Museum of Osteology, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, U.S. During the 1960s and 1970s, hundreds of fossils were found in East Africa in the regions of the Olduvai Gorge and Lake Turkana. These searches were carried out by the Leakey family, with Louis Leakey and his wife Mary Leakey, and later their son Richard and daughter-in-law Maeve, fossil hunters and paleoanthropologists. From the fossil beds of Olduvai and Lake Turkana they amassed specimens of the early hominins, the Australopithecines and Homo species, and even H. erectus. These finds cemented Africa as the cradle of humankind. In the late 1970s and the 1980s, Ethiopia emerged as the new hotspot of paleoanthropology after Lucy, the most complete fossil member of the species Australopithecus afarensis, was found in 1974 by Donald Johanson near Hadar in the desertic Afar Triangle region of northern Ethiopia. Although the specimen had a small brain, the pelvis and leg bones were almost identical in function to those of modern humans, showing with certainty that these hominins had walked erect. 227 Lucy was classified as a new species, Australopithecus afarensis, which is thought to be more closely related to the genus Homo as a direct ancestor, or as a close relative of an unknown ancestor, than any other known hominid or hominin from this early time range. 228 The specimen was nicknamed Lucy, after the Beatles' song, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, which was played loudly and repeatedly in the camp during the excavations. 229 The Afar Triangle area would later yield discovery of many more hominin fossils, particularly those uncovered or described by teams headed by Tim D. White in the 1990s, including Ardipithecus ramidus and a cadaver. 230 In 2013, fossil skeletons of Homo naledi, an extinct species of hominin assigned provisionally to the genus Homo, were found in the Rising Star Cave System, a site in South Africa's Cradle of Humankind region in Gauteng province near Johannesburg. 232 As of September 2015, fossils of at least 15 individuals, amounting to 1,550 specimens, have been excavated from the cave. 232 The species is characterized by a body mass and stature similar to small-bodied human populations, a smaller endocranial volume similar to Australopithecus, and a cranial morphology, skull-shaped, similar to early Homo species. The skeletal anatomy combines primitive features known from Australopithecines with features known from early hominins. The individuals show signs of having been deliberately disposed of within the cave near the time of death. The fossils were dated close to 250,000 years ago, 233, and thus are not ancestral but contemporary with the first appearance of larger-brained anatomically modern humans. 234. The genetic revolution. The genetic revolution in studies of human evolution started when Vincent Sarek and Alan Wilson measured the strength of immunological cross-reactions of blood serum albumin between pairs of creatures, including humans and African apes, chimpanzees and gorillas. 235 The strength of the reaction could be expressed numerically as an immunological distance, which was in turn proportional to the number of amino acid differences between homologous proteins in different species. By constructing a calibration curve of the ID of species pairs with known divergence times in the fossil record, the data could be used as a molecular clock to estimate the times of divergence of pairs with poor or unknown fossil records. In their seminal 1967 paper in Science, Sarek and Wilson estimated the divergence time of humans and apes as 4 to 5 million years ago, 235, at a time when standard interpretations of the fossil record gave this divergence as at least 10 to as much as 30 million years. Subsequent fossil discoveries, notably, Lucy, in reinterpretation of older fossil materials, notably Ramapithecus, showed the younger estimates to be correct and validated the albumin method. Progress in DNA sequencing, specifically mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA, and then Y chromosome DNA, Y-DNA, advanced the understanding of human origins. 123, 236, 237, application of the molecular clock principle revolutionized the study of molecular evolution. On the basis of a separation from the orangutan between 10 and 20 million years ago, earlier studies of the molecular clock suggested that there were about 76 mutations per generation that were not inherited by human children from their parents. This evidence supported the divergence time between hominins and chimpanzees noted above. However, a 2012 study in Iceland of 78 children and their parents suggests a mutation rate of only 36 mutations per generation. This datum extends the separation between humans and chimpanzees to an earlier period greater than 7 million years ago, Ma. Additional research with 226 offspring of wild chimpanzee populations in 8 locations suggests that chimpanzees reproduce at age 26.5 years on average, which suggests the human divergence from chimpanzees occurred between 7 and 13 Maya. And these data suggest that Ardipithecus 4.5 Ma, Oran 6 Ma, and Sahelanthropus 7 Ma all may be on the hominid lineage, and even that the separation may have occurred outside the East African Rift region. Furthermore, analysis of the two species genes in 2006 provides evidence that after human ancestors had started to diverge from chimpanzees, interspecies mating between proto-human and proto-chimpanzees nonetheless occurred regularly enough to change certain genes in the new gene pool. A new comparison of the human and chimpanzee genome suggests that after the two lineages separated, they may have begun interbreeding. A principal finding is that the X chromosomes of humans and chimpanzees appear to have diverged about 1.2 million years more recently than the other chromosomes. The research suggests there were in fact two splits between the human and chimpanzee lineages, with the first being followed by interbreeding between the two populations and then a second split. The suggestion of a hybridization has startled paleoanthropologists, who nonetheless are treating the new genetic data seriously. 238. The quest for the earliest hominin. In the 1990s, several teams of paleoanthropologists were working throughout Africa looking for evidence of the earliest divergence of the hominin lineage from the great apes. In 1994, Maeve Leakey discovered Australopithecus inamensis. The find was overshadowed by Tim D. White's 1995 discovery of Ardipithecus ramidus, which pushed back the fossil record to 4.2 million years ago. In 2000, Martin Pickford and Bridget Sinnott discovered, in the Tugan Hills of Kenya, a 6 million year old bipedal hominin which they named Oran tuganensis. And in 2001, a team led by Michel Brunet discovered the skull of Sahelanthropus chidensis, which was dated as 7.2 million years ago, and which Brunet argued was a bipedal, and therefore a hominid, that is, a hominin, cf. hominidae, terms, hominids, and hominins. Human dispersal. A global mapping model of human migration, based from divergence of the mitochondrial DNA, which indicates the matrilineage. 239, 240, 241 timescale Ka indicated by colors. A trellis, as Milford H. Wolpoff called it, that emphasizes back and forth gene flow among geographic regions. 242. Different models for the beginning of the present human species. Anthropologists in the 1980s were divided regarding some details of reproductive barriers and migratory dispersals of the genus Homo. Subsequently, genetics has been used to investigate and resolve these issues. According to the Sahara pump theory, evidence suggests that the genus Homo have migrated out of Africa at least 3 and possibly 4 times, e.g. Homo erectus, Homo heidelbergensis, and 2 or 3 times for Homo sapiens. Recent evidence suggests these dispersals are closely related to fluctuating periods of climate change. 243. Recent evidence suggests that humans may have left Africa 500,000 years earlier than previously thought. A joint Franco-Indian team has found human artifacts in the Siwak Hills north of New Delhi dating back at least 2.6 million years. This is earlier than the earliest finding of genus Homo at Dmanisi, in Georgia, dating to 1.85 million years. Although controversial, tools found at a Chinese cave strengthen the case that humans used tools as far back as 2.48 million years ago. 244. This suggests that the Asian, chopper, tool tradition, found in Java and northern China may have left Africa before the appearance of the Acheulean hand axe. Dispersal of modern Homo sapiens. Up until the genetic evidence became available, there were 2 dominant models for the dispersal of modern humans. The multi-regional hypothesis proposed that the genus Homo contained only a single interconnected population as it does today, not separate species, and that its evolution took place worldwide continuously over the last couple of million years. This model was proposed in 1988 by Milford H. Wolpoff. 245, 246. In contrast, the out of Africa model proposed that modern H. sapiens speciated in Africa recently, that is, approximately 200,000 years ago, and the subsequent migration through Eurasia resulted in a nearly complete replacement of other Homo species. This model has been developed by Chris Stringer and Peter Andrews. 247, 248. Sequencing mtDNA and y-DNA sampled from a wide range of indigenous populations revealed ancestral information relating to both male and female genetic heritage, and strengthened the out of Africa theory and weakened the views of multi-regional evolutionism. 249. Aligned and genetic tree differences were interpreted as supportive of a recent single origin. 250. Out of Africa has thus gained support from research using female mitochondrial DNA and the male Y chromosome. After analyzing genealogy trees constructed using 133 types of mtDNA, researchers concluded that all were descended from a female African progenitor, dubbed mitochondrial Eve. Out of Africa is also supported by the fact that mitochondrial genetic diversity is highest among African populations. 251. A broad study of African genetic diversity, headed by Sarah Tishkoff, found the San people had the greatest genetic diversity among the 113 distinct populations sampled, making them one of 14 inches ancestral population clusters. The research also located a possible origin of modern human migration in southwestern Africa, near the coastal border of Namibia and Angola. 252. The fossil evidence was insufficient for archaeologist Richard Leakey to resolve the debate about exactly where in Africa modern humans first appeared. 253. Studies of haplogroups in Y chromosomal DNA and mitochondrial DNA have largely supported a recent African origin. 254. All the evidence for autosomal DNA also predominantly supports a recent African origin. However, evidence for archaic admixture in modern humans, both in Africa and later, throughout Eurasia has recently been suggested by a number of studies. 255. Recent sequencing of Neanderthal 89 and Denisovan 43 genomes shows that some admixture with these populations has occurred. All modern human groups outside Africa have 1-4% or, according to more recent research, about 1.5-2.6% Neanderthal alleles in their genome. 90 and some Melanesians have an additional 4-6% of Denisovan alleles. These new results do not contradict the out of Africa model, except in its strictest interpretation, although they make the situation more complex. After recovery from a genetic bottleneck that some researchers speculate might be linked to the Toba supervolcano catastrophe, a fairly small group left Africa and interbred with Neanderthals, probably in the Middle East, on the Eurasian steppe or even in North Africa before their departure. Their still predominantly African descendants spread to populate the world. A fraction in turn interbred with Denisovans, probably in Southeastern Asia, before populating Melanesia. 99 HLA haplotypes of Neanderthal and Denisova origin have been identified in modern Eurasian and Oceanian populations. 45 The Denisovan EPAS1 gene has also been found in Tibetan populations. 256 Studies of the human genome using machine learning have identified additional genetic contributions in Eurasians from an unknown ancestral population potentially related to the Neanderthal Denisovan lineage. 257. A map of early human migrations. There are still differing theories on whether there was a single exodus from Africa or several. A multiple dispersal model involves the southern dispersal theory, 258, 259, 260, which has gained support in recent years from genetic, linguistic and archaeological evidence. In this theory, there was a coastal dispersal of modern humans from the Horn of Africa crossing the Bab el-Mandeb to Yemen at a lower sea level around 70,000 years ago. This group helped to populate Southeast Asia and Oceania, explaining the discovery of early human sites in these areas much earlier than those in the Levant. 258 This group seems to have been dependent upon marine resources for their survival. Stephen Oppenheimer has proposed a second wave of humans may have later dispersed through the Persian Gulf oases and the Zagros Mountains into the Middle East. Alternatively, it may come across the Sinai Peninsula into Asia, from shortly after 50,000 years BP, resulting in the bulk of the human populations of Eurasia. It has been suggested that this second group possibly possessed a more sophisticated, big game hunting, tool technology and was less dependent on coastal food sources than the original group. Much of the evidence for the first group's expansion would have been destroyed by the rising sea levels at the end of each glacial maximum. 258 The multiple dispersal model is contradicted by studies indicating that the populations of Eurasia and the populations of Southeast Asia and Oceania are all descended from the same mitochondrial DNA L3 lineages, which support a single migration out of Africa that gave rise to all non-African populations. 261. On the basis of the early date of Badaotian Iranian aregnation, Oppenheimer suggests that this second dispersal may have occurred with a pluvial period about 50,000 years before the present, with modern human big game hunting culture spreading up the Zagros Mountains, carrying modern human genomes from Oman, throughout the Persian Gulf, northward into Armenia and Anatolia, with a variant traveling south into Israel and to Cyrenaica. 197. Recent genetic evidence suggests that all modern non-African populations, including those of Eurasia and Oceania, are descended from a single wave that left Africa between 65,000 and 50,000 years ago. 262, 263, 264. Evidence on which scientific accounts of human evolution are based comes from many fields of natural science. The main source of knowledge about the evolutionary process has traditionally been the fossil record, but since the development of genetics beginning in the 1970s, DNA analysis has come to occupy a place of comparable importance. The studies of ontogeny, phylogeny and especially evolutionary developmental biology of both vertebrates and invertebrates offer considerable insight into the evolution of all life, including how humans evolved. The specific study of the origin and life of humans is anthropology, particularly paleoanthropology, which focuses on the study of human prehistory. 265. Evidence from genetics. Family tree showing the extant hominoids. Humans genus Homo, chimpanzees and bonobos genus Pan, gorillas genus Gorilla, orangutans genus Pongo, and gibbons 4 genera of the family Hylobatidae, Hylobates, Hulock, Nomascus, and Symphalongus. All except gibbons are hominids. The closest living relatives of humans are bonobos and chimpanzees, both genus Pan, and gorillas genus Gorilla. 266 With the sequencing of both the human and chimpanzee genome, as of 2012 estimates of the similarity between their DNA sequences range between 95% and 99%. 266, 267, 30 It is also noteworthy that mice share around 97.5% of their working DNA with humans. 268 By using the technique called the molecular clock, which estimates the time required for the number of divergent mutations to accumulate between two lineages, the approximate date for the split between lineages can be calculated. The gibbons family Hylobatidae and then the orangutans genus Pongo were the first groups to split from the line leading to the hominins, including humans, followed by gorillas genus Gorilla, and, ultimately, by the chimpanzees genus Pan. The splitting date between hominin and chimpanzee lineages is placed by some between 4 to 8 million years ago, that is, during the late Miocene. 269, 270, 271, 272 Speciation, however, appears to have been unusually drawn out. Initial divergence occurred sometime between 7 to 13 million years ago, but ongoing hybridization blurred the separation and delayed complete separation during several millions of years. Patterson 2006 stated the final divergence at 5 to 6 million years ago. 273. Genetic evidence has also been employed to compare species within the genus Homo, investigating gene flow between early modern humans and Neanderthals, and to enhance the understanding of the early human migration patterns and splitting dates. By comparing the parts of the genome that are not under natural selection and which therefore accumulate mutations at a fairly steady rate, it is possible to reconstruct a genetic tree incorporating the entire human species since the last shared ancestor. Each time a mutation, single nucleotide polymorphism, appears in an individual and is passed on to his or her descendants, a haplogroup is formed including all of the descendants of the individual who will also carry that mutation. By comparing mitochondrial DNA, which is inherited only from the mother, geneticists have concluded that the last female common ancestor whose genetic marker is found in all modern humans, the so-called mitochondrial Eve, must have lived around 200,000 years ago. Human evolutionary genetics studies how human genomes differ among individuals, the evolutionary paths that gave rise to them, and their current effects. Differences between genomes have anthropological, medical and forensic implications and applications. Genetic data can provide important insight into human evolution. In May 2023, scientists reported a more complicated pathway of human evolution than previously understood. According to the studies, humans evolved from different places and times in Africa, instead of from a single location and period of time. 274, 275. Evidence from the fossil record. Replica of fossil skull of H. habilis. Fossil number KNMER 1813, found at Kubifora, Kenya. Replica of fossil skull of H. ergaster, African. H. erectus. Fossil number KHMU 3733, discovered in 1975 in Kenya. There is little fossil evidence for the divergence of the gorilla, chimpanzee and hominin lineages. 276 The earliest fossils that have been proposed as members of the hominin lineage are Sahelanthropus chidensis dating from 7 million years ago, or Tugenensis dating from 5.7 million years ago, and Ardipithecus cadavra dating to 5.6 million years ago. Each of these have been argued to be a bipedal ancestor of later hominins, but, in each case, the claims have been contested. It is also possible that one or more of these species are ancestors of another branch of African apes, or that they represent a shared ancestor between hominins and other apes. The question then of the relationship between these early fossil species and the hominin lineage is still to be resolved. From these early species, the Australopithecines arose around 4 million years ago and diverged into robust, also called Paranthropus, in gracile branches, one of which, possibly Agaric, probably went on to become ancestors of the genus Homo. The Australopithecine species that is best represented in the fossil record is Australopithecus afarensis, with more than 100 fossil individuals represented, found from northern Ethiopia, such as the famous Lucy, to Kenya, and South Africa. Fossils of robust Australopithecines such as the Robustus, or alternatively Paranthropus robustus, and A. P. boisei are particularly abundant in South Africa at sites such as Kromdrai and Swartkrans, and around Lake Turkana in Kenya. The earliest member of the genus Homo is Homo habilis, which evolved around 2.8 million years ago. 33 H. habilis is the first species for which we have positive evidence of the use of stone tools. They developed the Olduvai lithic technology, named after the Olduvai gorge in which the first specimens were found. Some scientists consider Homo rudolfensis, a larger-bodied group of fossils with similar morphology to the original H. habilis fossils, to be a separate species, while others consider them to be part of H. habilis, simply representing intraspecies variation, or perhaps even sexual dimorphism. The brains of these early hominins were about the same size as that of a chimpanzee, and their main adaptation was bipedalism as an adaptation to terrestrial living. During the next million years, a process of encephalization began and, by the arrival about 1.9 million years ago of H. erectus in the fossil record, cranial capacity had doubled. H. erectus were the first of the hominins to emigrate from Africa, and, from 1.8 to 1.3 million years ago, this species spread through Africa, Asia, and Europe. One population of H. erectus, also sometimes classified as separate species H. ergaster, remained in Africa and evolved into H. sapiens. It is believed that H. erectus and H. ergaster were the first to use fire and complex tools. In Eurasia, H. erectus evolved into species such as H. antecessor, H. heidelbergensis and H. neanderthalensis. The earliest fossils of anatomically modern humans are from the Middle Paleolithic, about 300-200,000 years ago, such as the Herda and Omo remains of Ethiopia, Jebel or Houd remains of Morocco, and Florisbad remains of South Africa. Later fossils from the School Cave in Israel and southern Europe begin around 90,000 years ago, 0.09 million years ago. As modern humans spread out from Africa, they encountered other hominins such as H. neanderthalensis and the Denisovans, who may have evolved from populations of H. erectus that had left Africa around 2 million years ago. The nature of interaction between early humans and these sister species has been a long-standing source of controversy, the question being whether humans replaced these earlier species or whether they were in fact similar enough to interbreed, in which case these earlier populations may have contributed genetic material to modern humans. 277-278. This migration out of Africa is estimated to have begun about 70-50,000 years BP, and modern humans subsequently spread globally, replacing earlier hominins either through competition or hybridization. They inhabited Eurasia and Oceania by 40,000 years BP, and the Americas by at least 14,500 years BP. 279. Interspecies breeding. A model of the evolution of the genus Homo over the last 2 million years, vertical axis. The rapid, out of Africa, expansion of H. sapiens is indicated at the top of the diagram, with admixture indicated with Neanderthals, Denisovans, and unspecified archaic African hominins. The hypothesis of interbreeding, also known as hybridization, admixture or hybrid origin theory, has been discussed ever since the discovery of Neanderthal remains in the 19th century. 280. The linear view of human evolution began to be abandoned in the 1970s as different species of humans were discovered that made the linear concept increasingly unlikely. In the 21st century, with the advent of molecular biology techniques and computerization, whole genome sequencing of Neanderthal and human genome were performed, confirming recent admixture between different human species. 89. In 2010, evidence based on molecular biology was published, revealing unambiguous examples of interbreeding between archaic and modern humans during the Middle Paleolithic and early Upper Paleolithic. It has been demonstrated that interbreeding happened in several independent events that included Neanderthals and Denisovans, as well as several unidentified hominins. 281. Today, approximately 2% of DNA from all non-African populations, including Europeans, Asians, and Oceans, is Neanderthal, 89, with traces of Denisovan heritage. 282. Also, 4-6% of modern Melanesian genetics are Denisovan. 282. Comparisons of the human genome to the genomes of Neanderthals, Denisovans and apes can help identify features that set modern humans apart from other hominine species. In a 2016 comparative genomics study, a Harvard Medical School UCLA research team made a world map on the distribution and made some predictions about where Denisovan and Neanderthal genes may be impacting modern human biology. 283, 284, for example, comparative studies in the mid-2010s found several traits related to neurological, immunological, 285 developmental, and metabolic phenotypes that were developed by archaic humans to European and Asian environments and inherited to modern humans through admixture with local hominins. 286, 287. Although the narratives of human evolution are often contentious, several discoveries since 2010 show that human evolution should not be seen as a simple linear or branched progression, but a mix of related species. 43, 5, 6, 7. In fact, genomic research has shown that hybridization between substantially diverged lineages is the rule, not the exception, in human evolution. 4. Furthermore, it is argued that hybridization was an essential creative force in the emergence of modern humans. 4. Stone tools. Stone tools are first attested around 2.6 million years ago, when hominins in eastern Africa used so-called core tools, choppers made out of round cores that had been split by simple strikes. 288. This marks the beginning of the Paleolithic, or Old Stone Age. Its end is taken to be the end of the last ice age, around 10,000 years ago. The Paleolithic is subdivided into the Lower Paleolithic, Early Stone Age, ending around 350,000 years ago, the Middle Paleolithic, Middle Stone Age, until 50,000 years ago, and the Upper Paleolithic, Late Stone Age, 10,000 years ago. Archaeologists working in the Great Rift Valley in Kenya have discovered the oldest known stone tools in the world. Dated to around 3.3 million years ago, the implements are some 700,000 years older than stone tools from Ethiopia that previously held this distinction. 191, 289, 290, 291. The period from 700,000 to 300,000 years ago is also known as the Acheulean, when H. ergaster or erectus made large stone hand axes out of flint and quartzite, at first quite rough early Acheulean, later, retouched, by additional, more subtle strikes at the sides of the flakes. After 350,000 BP the more refined called levallois technique was developed, a series of consecutive strikes, by which scrapers, slicers, brossoirs, needles, and flattened needles were made. 288 Finally, after about 50,000 BP, ever more refined and specialized flint tools were made by the Neanderthals and the immigrant Cro-Magnons, knives, blades, skimmers. Bone tools were also made by H. sapiens in Africa by 90,000 70,000 years ago, 198, 292, and are also known from early H. sapiens sites in Eurasia by about 50,000 years ago. Species list. This list is in chronological order across the table by genus. Some species, subspecies names are well established, and some are less established, especially in genus Homo. Please see articles for more information. Domestication is a multi-generational mutualistic relationship in which an animal species, such as humans or leafcutter ants, takes over control and care of another species, such as sheep or fungi, to obtain from them a steady supply of resources, such as meat, milk, or labor. The process is gradual and geographically diffuse, based on trial and error. Domestication affected genes for behavior in animals, making them less aggressive. In plants, domestication affected genes for morphology, such as increasing seed size and stopping the shattering of cereal seed heads. Such changes both make domesticated organisms easier to handle and reduce their ability to survive in the wild. Dogs and sheep were among the first animals to be domesticated, at least 15,000 and 11,000 years ago respectively. 1. Rice was domesticated in China, some 9,000 years ago. 2. The first animal to be domesticated by humans was the dog, as a commensal, at least 15,000 years ago. Other animals, including goats, sheep, and cows, were domesticated around 11,000 years ago. Among birds, the chicken was first domesticated in East Asia, seemingly for cockfighting, some 7,000 years ago. The horse came under domestication around 5,500 years ago in Central Asia as a working animal. Among invertebrates, the silkworm and the western honeybee were domesticated over 5,000 years ago for silk and honey, respectively. The domestication of plants began around 13,000 to 11,000 years ago with cereals such as wheat and barley in the Middle East, alongside crops such as lentil, pea, chickpea, and flax. Beginning around 10,000 years ago, indigenous peoples in the Americas began to cultivate peanuts, squash, maize, potatoes, cotton, and cassava. Rice was first domesticated in China some about 9,000 years ago. In Africa, crops such as sorghum were domesticated. Agriculture developed in some 13 centers around the world, domesticating different crops and animals. 3 groups of insects, namely ambrosia beetles, leafcutter ants, and fungus-growing termites have independently domesticated species of fungi, on which they feed. In the case of the termites, the relationship is a fully obligate symbiosis on both sides. Definitions. Domestication, not to be confused with the taming of an individual animal. 3, 4, 5 is from the Latin domesticus, belonging to the house. 6. The term remained loosely defined until the 21st century, when the American archaeologist Melinda A. Zetter defined it as a long-term relationship in which humans take over control and care of another organism to gain a predictable supply of a resource, resulting in mutual benefits. She noted further that it is not synonymous with agriculture since agriculture depends on domesticated organisms but does not automatically result from domestication. 7. Diagram of process of domestication is a process where one species actively manages another to obtain resources or services, as defined by Michael D. Beruginen 8. Michael D. Beruginen notes that domestication has been hard to define, despite the instinctual consensus